Okay, we have started recording.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the first meeting of a Rulemaking Advisory Committee to implement House Bill 2517. We're going to get started with some introductions here. It's a sizable but not enormous group of people, so I think we can go through everyone. I'm just going to call on people so that we can get through this without people tripping over each other. So please just let us know who you are and your affiliation real quick. So we'll start with Jennifer Baker.
Sorry.
You there, Jen?
Sorry, Jennifer Baker, Providence Health Plan.
Great. And Antoinette?
Yes, sorry. Here I am. Antoinette Awachi, Cambia Health Solutions, Regents.
Great, thank you. Chris?
Sure, it's Chris Bonneff at NAMI, Oregon.
Great, thanks, Chris. Courtney?
Hi, Courtney Dresser with the Oregon Medical Association, and to help with save some time and energy, some of our OMA team members are here with me. Mark Bonanno, Rick Martina, and Ivy Jones are OMA team members who have been working on this for the past few years.
Great, thank you. Dan?
I think you mean me. I'm Dan Cushing. I'm with the Oregon Association of Acupuncturists. I'm just watching. Our seated RAC member is Lisa Poole.
Great, thank you. Dave?
Hi, Jesse. Good morning, everybody. This is Dave Nestler-Cass with Moda Health Plan.
Great, and Gary?
Good morning, Jesse. I'm Gary Holliday. I'm the Commercial Compliance Manager at Pacific Source Health Plans.
Jennifer Lewis-Goff?
Good morning, Jen Lewis-Goff with the Oregon Dental Association.
Great, and Lisa Poole?
Lisa Poole with the Oregon Acupuncture Association.
Great. Skip some people who are already mentioned. Michelle?
Good morning, Michelle Baird with Pacific Source Health Plans.
Anne Murray?
Good morning, excuse me, Anne Murray with Bristol Myers Squibb State Government Affairs.
Nia?
Hi, this is Nia Ray with Cigna.
Sarah Petty?
Hi there, Sarah Petty, Providence Health Plan.
Rika Martini?
Rika Martini, Oregon Medical Association.
Oh, you were probably one of the ones already introduced. And Sadie?
Good morning, everybody. Sadie Elwood with Kaiser.
Great, and we have a couple of people on the phone. Who has the 503 area code?
Ethan Baldwin, DFR.
Hi, Ethan. And who has the 732 area code?
Hi, this is Mary Beth Carino. I'm the healthcare advocate with OSPERG.
Hi, Mary Beth. And then also from the Division of Financial Regulation, we have Karen Winkle, our rules coordinator, Sally Sylvester, our policy team assistant, and Cassie Susi, senior policy advisor. Is there anybody else we missed? All right, so let's get started. So quick agenda overview. I'm going to do just a real quick overview of what's in the bill that we're talking about today, and then we will go in detail through the draft rule language, which I sent out yesterday evening. I'm sure people haven't had a lot of time to look at it, but hopefully we can go through it and get some initial feedback. And then we'll talk briefly about the draft statement of need and fiscal impact, which I put out there. And that's something that has to accompany an administrative rule filing. And then there'll be time for public comment, any further comments anyone has, and then we'll wrap it up. Any questions about the agenda? All right, so House Bill 2517 is a fairly long and complicated bill that does a number of different things related to prior authorization, utilization review, and step therapy, and also creates some new reporting requirements. And I'll just say upfront that my interpretation, at least, which obviously we can discuss, is that the vast majority of what's in the bill is self-implementing and does not require additional rulemaking on the part of the division. Happy to entertain other thoughts if people disagree, or if there's areas where we need to clarify things further. But it's a bill that was the product of multiple legislative sessions and a whole lot of stakeholder work and compromise. So I think a lot of the provisions are already pretty well spelled out. But there are a few areas where we need to do rulemaking, which I'll get into. But I thought first I'd just really quickly run through the different sections of the bill and what they do. So section 1 of the bill relates to coordinated care organization reporting, which is a bit outside of our scope since we don't regulate CCOs. Then section 2, which is one of the important sections for the rulemaking purposes, amends provisions related to insurer reporting for an existing report that we get, an annual report on grievances and appeals, and adds a number of new required data elements to those reports having to do with prior authorization. And that report is further fleshed out by some administrative rules, which is why I think we need to do some rulemaking around that, so that everything having to do with the report is all laid out in rule. And then section 3 of the bill has to do with the external review process and the independent review organizations. And it creates the requirement that independent review organizations have to involve a clinician in the same or a similar specialty to the specialty involved with the service under external review. And then section 4 makes prior authorization determinations binding for at least 60 days. And that's something where we need to do rulemaking because our current rule uses the 30-day number that's in the prior statute. And then section 5 does a whole lot of things. I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds on them, but it includes requiring that utilization review criteria be evidence-based and regularly updated. It prohibits insurers from requiring healthcare providers to resubmit information related to a prior auth request or other utilization review. It requires that information about the process be made available to providers and requires that insurers set up a website with a bunch of particular requirements around information about the process and how to submit required information for prior authorization determinations, etc. And then it requires that physicians, licensed physicians must actually make the final utilization review decisions, as opposed to just supervising the people who make those decisions. It requires that there be a plain language notice of denial provided. It requires ongoing coverage of services or drugs when there's a change to the formulary or other coverage changes that impact an existing course of treatment, provided that the request for an exception process or the prior auth process is underway. It requires a 60-day advance notice to providers of changes in utilization review processes. And then in addition to the 60 days, it requires that prior auths have to be binding for the reasonable duration of treatment based on clinical criteria, and up to a year for prescription drugs under certain specified circumstances with certain specified exceptions. A little bit complicated. That's section 5. Section 6 lays out a number of requirements having to do with step therapy, a lot of which are similar to requirements in section 5. Section 7 makes some technical changes to definitions, including the definition of prior auth. It also adds a new definition of step therapy. And then section 8 is basically just a conforming amendment because there's a law that sunsets, so it doesn't really, that section doesn't really do anything substantive. Section 9 removes a provision that an insurer meets certain prior auth requirements if it uses a uniform prescription drug prior auth form that the division promulgates by regulation in a specified way. And then sections 10 and 11 apply requirements to PEB and OEB. I'm not going to go into detail on that. And then section 12 sets the deadlines for compliance with the website requirements. So that's the basic overview of the bill. I'll stop there and see if anyone thinks I missed anything or got anything wrong, or if there's any questions. I will take that as a no. It looks like a couple of people have joined us since we did introductions. Could people introduce themselves if you haven't done so yet, please?
Hello, I'm Greg Miller. I'm the medical director of at Unity Center for Behavioral Health. Thank you.
Hi, this is Bill Bushka, Director of Government Relations with Samaritan Health Plans. Thanks.
Good morning. Anyone else? All right. Hearing nothing else, I think I will move on to discuss the draft rule text that I sent out. So bear with me here. I'm going to dive into the weeds of the wording here. I'll try to make it as succinct as possible. But there's 4 rules at issue here. There's 2 rules that relate to the prior authorization process and requirements around that. And they're very similar. One of them, OAR 836-053-1200, relates to and applies to health benefit plans. So those are kind of comprehensive health plans, the kinds of health plans people usually think of, like ACA compliant health plans. And then 1203, which is the next rule, applies to other forms of health insurance that are not health benefit plans. So that would apply to, for instance, a short-term limited duration health plan or some other kind of health product. And they're very similar. They're different only in as much as the one that is not for health benefit plans does not refer to external review, if I remember correctly, because that is not applicable to those plans. The underlying rule here has been in place for a pretty long time, and we updated it just a couple of years ago because actually the division had a bill making some changes to the prior auth process. But it is the existing rule is in conflict with House Bill 2517 in a couple of ways. So we think we need to update it again. I'll just go through the rule here briefly. So in the subsection 1 here, there's some changes that are basically just technical. So I'm changing the statutory references because we're talking about amendments by the new law rather than the previous rulemaking, which was referring to a previous law. And then I am changing the definition of prior auth to just align with the new definition in House Bill 2517. I don't think that makes a huge difference, but does seem like an important thing to do. And then subsections 2 through 5, I'm proposing to keep the same because I don't think there's anything in the bill that changes those elements. And then subsection 6 is the piece that addresses how long a prior authorization is binding on the insurance company. And so we do have to change that. I recognize up front that the way this is worded is pretty confusing. And that's just the way the existing rule was written from well before my time. And we could change the whole thing around, but I'm trying to keep the changes as minimal as possible just to make it less confusing for everyone. Subsection A of section 6 here, I think is particularly confusing because there's this reference to 5 business days. What this is about is a situation that I think doesn't come up very often, but it's a situation where someone is trying to get a prior authorization, but it is not known at the time whether it is not known at the time that the person is actually not eligible for participation in the health plan any longer because perhaps they have been fired from their job, or there's all kinds of situations where you can kind of imagine that happening. And this was created as sort of a buffer for that. So it basically relates to when a health plan has specific knowledge that someone's eligibility is no longer in place, and creates a buffer there. And I'm not proposing to change that, but I just wanted to explain that because I think it's pretty confusing. But then, in the ordinary course of business, it's really B and C that kick in here. So what I am proposing here is to change B, which currently refers to a 30-day time period, to make it 60 days instead, as the bill requires. And then also add a reference to the reasonable duration of the treatment based on clinical standards, and then add in a new subsection C that refers to the prescription drug requirements and the fact that the binding period for a prescription drug could be longer if it meets the criteria spelled out in the law. And I'm basically lifting the language just directly from the bill there. You know, in a legal sense, that's redundant because the law would trump the rule anyway, but just for clarity's sake, we think it's helpful to have it there laid out in the rule as well, just so there's no confusion there. There's some more to talk about, but I'm going to stop briefly there to see if that makes sense. I know there's a lot going on there. Hearing nothing, I guess I will move on. Then you know, that's basically it for that rule, except that section 16 of the rule, I also updated the statutory reference just to reference where that law was codified as an update. And then the changes to OAR 836-053-1203 are exactly the same. It just exactly mirrors the other rule. It just applies to a different subset of health plans, and the goal is just to kind of align the requirements as much as possible, with the understanding that there are some things that don't apply to coverage that isn't a health benefit plan. So then I will move on to the reporting rule. So that is OAR 836-053-1070. So first of all, I'm proposing to rename the rule because it previously just referred to reporting of grievances. And then in subsection 1 here, there's some updates to statutory references, including the phrase prior authorization, also updating it to refer to DFR instead of the insurance division, and updating it with our new website URL. And then subsection E here lays out the existing data requirements for the report for the grievance information. And I'm just adding the word grievance there to clarify that that's just for that part of the report, and there's a new required part of the report, but I'm not changing anything in that section. But then I'm adding a subsection 6, which refers to the new data elements required, and basically just copies the language from the bill there. And again, you know, you could say that this is redundant because the law would trump the rule, but if people are looking at the rule as a reference point, we want to make sure all the necessary information is there. And then I'll just quickly go through the last rule change here. We have this other rule related to the existing annual report, which is OAR 836-053-1080, which requires basically that insurance carriers track all of the information necessary to complete the report, and make sure that they have sufficient records to document the required data elements and so forth. And so all I'm doing with the proposed changes here is making some technical corrections again, but also adding that this requires keeping records on the prior auth related data elements as well. That's really just kind of a technical update there. Okay, so that was a lot of filibustering from me. Anybody have any questions or comments so far?
Gary has his hand up.
Hey, Jesse.
Please go ahead.
Hey, to clarify, in regards to the reporting under 1070, can you elaborate a little bit more about what we're trying to answer, what question we're trying to answer with that information?
So,
because it's.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, are we trying? What question are we trying to answer?
So we were breaking up a little bit there, but I think what you were saying was just like, what is this for, basically?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think maybe others can speak to the legislative intent here better than I can. But I mean, I think the idea is just to have a little more transparency around what's going on globally with prior auth, and you know, how often prior auths are getting denied, that kind of thing. Our intent with the rulemaking is really just to make sure that we're including everything in the report that we're being directed to include by the legislature. But Courtney or anyone else from the OMA, is there anything you'd like to say about the intent?
Yeah, sure, Jesse. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. The kind of legislative intent and the intent around this issue, again, this has been part of the conversation and part of the legislation for the 3 years we drafted it, had it drafted, was really to just look at trends. And as we implement these transparency pieces that we are doing in 2517, are we seeing a trend of prior auth getting approved in a more readily fashion? And, you know, on the insurer front, we hear a lot of times that prior auths are approved easily, no problem. On the provider front, they say something different. So it's kind of a way to make sure we're getting data that's clear and that we can then work off of. I think there's a lot of conversations that are happening in the OHLC and other places where prior to the pandemic, of course, about different things that we can do to increase, you know, prior authorizations that are complete and ready to go the first time and get approved easily, or if we have providers who are always having to prior auth the same thing over and over again, they always get approved. Are there things we can do there? All of those are great ideas, but we really need the data to really kind of see where we are first, and then we can start working on these other possibilities together as a group. So that's kind of where we're going, Gary, with that information.
Okay, because it seems high level to me when I looked at the report requirements. For example, when we look at denials and the reasons, there's only 2 reasons there, which is medical necessity or an incomplete request. You know, they seem a little high level to me, and that's why I just asked them for the clarification. You know, do we need to, in the rules, either further identify the types of services to focus on an area if there's a particular segment of providers that are seeing their prior auths denied? You know, in the rules, do we need to go down another level, or is this high level truly going to be sufficient? That's what I'm trying to get at with the rulemaking is, you know, let's do something that's going to be effective now, because to me it seems a little high level, but if that's what people think, you know, they can have takeaways from there and answer questions, then I'm for that too. I don't know what the other carriers think, but to me it seems like it's pretty high, and I can understand the trends piece. But if there's a certain question we want to answer, let's do it now with rulemaking and, you know, create buckets that the carriers submit data in.
Well, I think from the OMA perspective, the more data, the better. I think I'm trying to remember our kind of original drafts of this 3 or 4 years ago, and there might have been some more detail there. We might have had to kind of negotiate some of that out. But again, obviously, I think on our front, the more the better, so we can look at the trends and really then address situations that we need to address. But I think for kind of getting this bill through and moving forward, that high level was necessary.
Yeah, I mean, speaking for the division, I think we'd be fine with considering looking at more information if that was the consensus of the group, but I don't think we necessarily have a position on it one way or the other. Yeah, I think the law sets kind of a floor for how much information we'd require in the report. That we have to at least have those elements, but we could ask for more specificity if that seemed like it would be helpful. But I think if anyone wants to suggest something specific in that area, we'd be happy to take comment and discuss it with the group in the future. Okay, any other comments or questions at this point? Looks like Antoinette's hand's up.
Yeah, hi, this is Antoinette from Cambia Regions. My question is relating to 836-053-1203, prior authorization trade practices for health insurance other than health benefit plans. I just wanted to get clarification. Obviously, Medicare supplement does not fall within the definition of health benefit plans. So does this also apply to those that line of business?
So I remember there was some discussion about this when we were last looking at the rules, and I honestly can't remember how that was resolved. So I could look into it. If there's anything in federal law or regulation that would preempt the state from imposing those requirements on Medicare supplement, then I think that would not apply to that extent. But I mean, I'm not sure how often the Medicare supplement plan would necessarily be doing this stuff anyway. But we can look into it further.
Great, thank you.
And yeah, technically, since 1203 applies to all health insurance policies and certificates, it applies to a very wide range of things that includes some things that people don't necessarily think of as health insurance, like disability policies, for instance, are health insurance under that definition, but they don't actually do any of the things outlined in the rule, so it doesn't really apply to them for that reason.
Oh, hey, Jesse, this is Dave with MODA. Just following up on that, I think it would be worth looking at. I think that's a good question. I'm just, 743B 420, which has this, now has the 60-day binding period, which you've carried over to the rules here. I mean, that broadly, it looks like it maybe is broader in its application, talks about insurers generally, but Section 5 of the bill, which is 743B 423, I think that, I don't know, it's worth looking at whether that's specific to health benefit plans. So just to see if we're sort of tying those two together in a way that maybe makes the application of the Section 5 portions, at least so as they're getting carried over to the rules here, maybe broader. I can't say I've got this fully thought through in my head, but I think it's worth just kind of looking through those again.
Yeah, so the part of the background of 1203, the non-health benefit provision here, is that we used a sort of unusual mechanism to apply those requirements to non-health benefit plans, where we kind of tied that in with the trade practice requirements that were passed as part of Senate Bill 249, our prior auth bill from 2019, to say basically, because the trade practice requirements around prior authorization apply to all health insurance. And so we said, this is a requirement for health benefit plans, and we're going to mirror that for non-health benefit plans and create the expectation that having reasonable prior auth timelines is part of complying with those trade practice requirements. So it is sort of moving over some requirements that specifically in statute only apply to health benefit plans and applying them to non-health benefit plans. But that was kind of the background of that. And whether that makes sense with what exactly we're doing here is a separate question. And if people have thoughts about that, I'm happy to take feedback. Our goal, I think, is just to try to make these rules as aligned as possible, because it, I think, makes it easier for everyone and creates a more uniform consumer protection structure, if that makes sense.
Thanks. It's helpful to have the background and kind of take that back and think it through.
Great. Any other thoughts about the draft at this point? I guess I'll also open it up a little broader and ask, is there anything else in the bill that we need to do rulemaking on that we're not looking at here? We have pretty broad rulemaking authority over the insurance code provisions here, but we don't want to be kind of hunting for rules to make just for the sake of making rules. I think a lot of the bill can be implemented with just the statutory language, but if people have any issues that they think need to be resolved with additional rule language, we're certainly happy to consider it.
Jesse, this is Courtney with the Oregon Medical Association. I respectfully ask the opportunity to answer that question at the next meeting. I think there's, now that we kind of see where the DCS rules are and can have some moment to digest that, that will give us an opportunity to kind of relook at the bill or the law and see if there's anything that needs clarity from the provider perspective. But you're right, this is, as you said earlier, this is a bill that's been in the making for a few years now, and a lot of back and forth negotiations have taken place. So hopefully it's all pretty well self-explanatory, but I would like to respectfully ask the opportunity to answer that at the next meeting.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't necessarily expect people to have answers right now, but I thought I'd pose the question at least. But if people want to provide their thoughts in writing, that would be really helpful, or we can discuss at the next meeting for sure. All right, anything else before I move on to the statement of need document? We're ahead of schedule, which is nice. I think the statement of need won't take too much time. So if I'm sure some of you are not familiar with our process or in general with the rulemaking process. So the statement of need and fiscal impact is something we call a SNFI, based on its acronym. And it's a document that has to accompany a proposed rule that explains the rationale for engaging in rulemaking and gives a brief overview of what the rule does, and then tries to estimate the impact of the rule on various parties. So the state, other government entities, affected stakeholder constituencies, and with a special focus on any impact on small businesses in particular. And the goal is to estimate the impact of the rule as opposed to the impact of the law that the rule is implementing. So that's why if you look at the draft, it says in several places that the law has a significant impact on a wide variety of entities, most notably providers and health insurers. But we think that the rules, at least the rules we're proposing so far, would not really have a significant impact because they are just about trying to implement the provisions of the law and clarify them and make sure that our existing rules are amended to reflect the changes. We'd invite any feedback on any part of the SNFI for sure. But if there are some impacts on any of you or other constituencies affected by the rulemaking, and especially if there's any impacts on small businesses, then we'd really appreciate feedback on that. And you'll note that there's a highlighted blank space on the third page of the SNFI, which is where we're kind of putting in the slot for any feedback from the RAC on possible impacts on small businesses. If anybody sees any impacts on small businesses and wants to give us some feedback on that, that would be super helpful. I would say that I think the main impact on small business of the law would be on healthcare providers, because some healthcare providers are small businesses. And I think the intent, at least, is that the impact would actually ease burdens on those providers in various ways. But I'm not sure whether we would want to say that the rule has a significant impact on those small businesses, but we'd love to get feedback on that. And then,
feedback via email?
At the end here, I'm going to talk about a deadline for getting feedback before the next meeting. But yeah, via email would be great. Also, of course, if anybody has any thoughts now, feel free to chime in.
Well, I think it has a very positive impact for my small business, particularly, around this. So I'm excited to see this, but I can also see some of the concerns on issues that could go both ways in terms of being both helpful and harmful. So I'll lay those out in an email and send them to you, because I think I could see how it could be detrimental and positive both for insurance companies, and I'm hoping we might be able to resolve some of those logistics for a win-win for everybody.
Great. Yeah, we'd love to get feedback on that. And also, the law, of course, has a significant impact on insurers. Will require a number of administrative changes and just changes to how utilization review processes are conducted and so forth. We want to note that in as much detail as needed here. I don't believe that the rule, at least in its current form, would have its own separate impact on insurers, but if it would, then we should note that. My understanding is that none of the insurers in Oregon constitute small businesses, so we don't necessarily have a count of all of the employees of insurers, but I'm pretty sure they're all large businesses by our definition here. All right, any thoughts about the SNFI? All right, any further thoughts from RAC members before we open it up for public comment?
Yeah, Jesse, this is Gary. I have a question. In looking at how all this comes together, the first report that includes the prior authorization data, that's going to be next year, 2022, correct?
Yeah.
And that's going to be for the 2021 calendar year?
I think that's right, yeah.
Okay. I say some insurers may have some challenges because they don't necessarily have a tracking mechanism in place that's now going to be required. Any thoughts or suggestions, impacts of that, of delaying the reporting for another year so that we can follow the law and say in 2022 we start the tracking of the prior auths and then the first report is in 2023?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm certainly open to feedback from others on this. These rules, which include the rules around tracking, would not be effective until January 1 of next year. There would not have been a legal requirement for insurers to be specifically tracking this data. If insurers were not tracking it or not tracking it in this format, then that could pose some challenges. I think on our end, we would accept a good faith effort at reporting in the first year. In terms of other allowances, I don't know. We can discuss it further.
Yeah, along the same lines, I'm not sure if I can guarantee that we're going to capture every single prior auth. I mean, I think our systems capture it, but I was thinking of that caveat there of, we may not have an official form. But I don't know what other insurance companies, their positions in, do they track all their prior auths, denies, reasons for denies, and so forth. So something I was just thinking about.
Anyone else have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, this is Dave with MODA. So for us, I think kind of a similar issue for the 2021 data period. We will have at least some amount of time of the year, maybe the better part of the year, that we don't have all the data elements that are required under the bill, since there are some we're not tracking, prior to the implementation or the effective date of the requirements. So that is something a good faith reporting standard would be, I think, is reasonable, given that sort of timing issue with the first report and the effective date of the law.
Well, that makes sense to me. We can discuss further internally, and we welcome any feedback on that. Any other RAC feedback?
This is Courtney from OMA. I think from our perspective on that, especially with 2021 being the year of 2021, kind of the do your best mentality would be probably, I wouldn't want an insurer to have a blank on their reporting and then somehow be, fined or in trouble by DCS. I think if you have a data report, if you don't, then you'll have it next year. So if there's a way to kind of do I don't know what the legal rulemaking term for do your best is, but maybe we can figure one out.
Yeah, and I think the question from our perspective would be whether this is something we need to address in the rule, or whether just that enforcement posture on the initial year. And we could communicate that in writing in some capacity if we needed to, but we welcome feedback on different possible approaches there. All right, well, we don't seem to have a huge number of people piling on to talk. Why don't we just open it up for public comment as well as RAC comment if anyone has anything to share. Going once, going twice. All right, well, if not, no reason to keep everyone longer. So our next meeting is scheduled for September 14th, which is a little under 2 weeks away. And I am hoping that we can get written feedback in advance of that, and we might make some edits, or bring some additional thoughts based on that feedback. So could people try to get us written feedback by a week from today, September 10th? Is that workable for folks? I will take silence as a yes. Great. Okay, so we will plan on getting written feedback then, and we will talk some more on the 14th. We do have a third meeting tentatively scheduled for September 28th. And I'm not sure whether that will be needed. I think we'll see what kind of feedback we receive. If people are okay with keeping the scope of the rulemaking relatively narrow as we're currently proposing, I'm not sure that it's necessary, but if there are other issues we need to discuss, that's fine, of course, and we can talk some more. So that's the plan from here, and we can make the decision about whether to have the third meeting at our second meeting, I think. One little programming note for folks is that my wife and I are actually expecting a baby very soon here. And the due date is actually just a couple of days after our next meeting. So it's possible that I'm going to be out even for that meeting, but definitely pretty soon here. Thanks everybody for the congrats. And we'll have to play it by ear in terms of next steps on this. But we do have some other policy team folks who are watching the process and can step in hopefully. And Ethan Baldwin has been helping me out putting things together for this meeting. So he's also a good person to go to for this. So one thing that means, I'll just mention, is that when you submit written comment, please don't just submit it to me. Please also include Karen and Ethan. Their information is in the agenda. All right. Any final thoughts for the good of the order here? If not, then I think we're good to go. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.
Have a good long weekend.